Hey guys, I'm Jessi Kneeland of Remodel Fitness. This is my Q&A series, Ask Jessi Kneeland. Question for today is, I'm dealing with some extremely painful triggers for emotions I repressed and am now honoring by feeling them so that they can pass. I'm struggling with not putting my anger onto others who wronged me or feeling like a victim. Not sure what to do yet with my anger, feeling like I should put it to some use, but not sure yet. When you feel triggered, how do you stay centered while in a public setting? And how do you move that feeling into positive action for the future? Number one, our emotions are biological signals. We feel them physically, they show up physically. So you can think of them kind of like any other biological signal. My favorite analogy is like having to pee, that like you wouldn't judge yourself for having to pee. You wouldn't be like, oh man, only weak people have to pee. This is bullshit. I shouldn't have to pee. Like, no, you just go, oh, I have to pee. And then you go and you find an appropriate setting in which to release this biological impulse. And the same is true of our emotions. Like some of them are not appropriate just to be releasing willy-nilly wherever you are, you know? Some of them really need to have like an appropriate setting. So when you notice them, rather than saying like, oh, I have to express this everywhere, you can just say, oh, I notice that I need to find a setting soon that would be appropriate to express this. Just like we don't go like, I have to pee, I'm peeing right now. You're like, I'm going to find a bathroom. So first of all, think of it that way, if that helps at all to kind of frame it, that you're not repressing it necessarily by finding an appropriate container to express it. Those are not the same things. Repressing is like trying not to feel it, trying not to let that be a part of who you are, your experience, ignoring it, shaming it, but like just going, oh, okay, cool, I got you. Like I'm angry. I'm going to find a time and place with which to be really fully angry that isn't this, because this isn't appropriate. I'm at work or, whatever it is. So find those containers, and then you actually do have to hold that appointment with yourself. Like you can't just say, you're like, oh, I'll find a time and place later, and then just never do it. You actually have to do it. You have to find an appropriate container, go, and find a way of expressing it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you are really struggling with feeling like a victim and having trouble with like putting the wronging on other people, then odds are pretty good that you're focusing on stuff that's outside of your control, which is really common. We all tend to do it. But the thing is, we tend to do it because it's almost like more comforting to think that we could control somebody else, or that like we know what's best for whatever, or that we have like some objective information about the world, like what's just and right. And how people should or shouldn't have done things. But we don't, we just don't. That's fake. It's made up. It's something we invented. So we have no objective truth about anything. So if it seems to you like he shouldn't have done that, like he said this thing to me and he shouldn't have said it, well, there's nothing you can do. A, because it's over, and B, because it was never in your hands. How somebody else behaves, what somebody else says, what somebody else does, those things are never in your control. And so focusing on affecting those things is a huge energy leak. And unfortunately, if you've been doing this for a while, if that's the way that you tend to focus naturally in life, it's focusing on controlling stuff that's uncontrollable, then when it doesn't go right, it's infuriating. Because you spend all this time and energy being like, I want you to behave differently. It's not fair. It like really creates a ruckus. So I would start looking for yourself at both in this particular situation and then also just in general in life, where are you trying to control things that are not yours to control, that are not your stuff, that you can't actually control, uncontrollable things. And then also what is in your control. Start looking at that and taking like radical responsibility for what is in your control, which usually looks like what you think, what you say, and what you do. And pretty much that's it, unfortunately. I wish it were different. Actually, I don't. I think it's perfect, because otherwise everyone would be controlling everyone else all the time. But we can't. We can't do that. We can't control outcomes. We can't control other people. We can't control pretty much anything except what we think, what we say, and what we do. And you'll notice I didn't include feel in that list, because what we feel follows a whole other set of rules, not the rules of logic or, the ability to control it. So the behavior is something you can control, but the feeling itself, that's out of your hands. So if you are finding yourself feeling this like heavy injustice and victim sense, I would start looking at what your mentality is like day to day. And I would guess that it's probably a lot of you trying to control stuff that's not in your control. And I would suggest switching and trying the best you can to move towards only focusing on what's in your control. Anything else is a waste of time, but it's also going to make this so much harder for you. It's going to make it so much more frustrating when things don't go your way and when things aren't right and they're not the way that you knew they could have been. And if anybody had asked you, it would have been different. But like, that's all just stuff you got to let go of because it's fake. It's a fake sense of comfort that we can control those things because we really can't. And if you actually used the stuff that's only in your control, then you can use your anger to move forwards in a positive way by seeing what it's here to tell you. If you were looking at stuff outside of your control and then you were like, I wonder what my anger is here to tell you, you're going to be like, it's here to tell me that that guy is an asshole, but that's not true. That's just you looking at stuff that's beyond your scope. So once you narrow your scope and you actually just look at like what's in my control, what can I think, do, and say, then you get to say, okay, well, what's my role in this and how can I use this? What needs to be done moving forwards? So you can use anger as I think I've mentioned that each emotion has a specific purpose and use and message to you, and anger shows up to tell you that a boundary needs to be set or strengthened, or that something needs to be set right. So as long as it's anger about something that's in your control, and by that I just mean like you can be mad about other stuff, but the way you're dealing with it, all that needs to be talked about in your control, then you can use it to move forwards and have something positive. If somebody said something to you that was really not okay, you might be mad at them, but ultimately the boundary needs to be with you, So being mad at them doesn't accomplish anything, but recognizing, wow, like I let people talk to me in a way that's not okay with me. That's a boundary you can do something about because that's in your control. What you think, what you do, and what you say. So once you take that scope in and start dealing only with you and what's in your control, then you also get the opportunity to use anger to move forwards in a way that benefits you, to listen to anger's message. Because there is a boundary somewhere. If there's a lot of anger, there's a boundary that's been crossed that needs to be either strengthened or set in the first place. Sometimes we don't realize we're like, I say yes to everything, for example. I hear this all the time from women. I say yes to anything because I never want to be impolite or say no. Well, that's your boundary that needs strengthening. It's not on everybody else to just magically know not to ask you to do things, but your resentment towards them, it's always towards them. You're not like, you might be mad at yourself, but you're also kind of like, screw that lady and her stupid cupcake bake sale. Like, you're mad at her, but that anger is just showing up to be like, hey, something needs to be strengthened here. This is not okay. So if you use the anger to look inwards at what you're doing and saying and thinking, there's almost always a boundary that needs to be strengthened or set there. So use the anger that way. Find an appropriate location to express it fully because it feels good. It needs to be expressed fully. It just doesn't need to be expressed fully every single moment that you feel it. Sometimes it's just saying, hey, I need to be expressed, and you can get yourself, to an appropriate setting for that. And then also start examining only what's in your control, how anger can help you move forwards, what boundary needs to be set or what needs to be set right in order to honor the message that anger is showing up with, and start examining where else in your life you're habitually looking at stuff outside of your control or trying to control stuff outside of your control, and start narrowing your life scope down to only what you can do and say and think, because that is ultimately going to be why or the way that you don't get triggered like this over and over again forever. I know you mentioned these were old triggers, and that's totally okay. And healing these things, like we're all doing healing from the past decades and decades of our lives. That's just how it goes. But in order to keep from just piling on more and more, you have to start dealing in currency that is something you can actually do something about, in an empowered currency, which is just looking at your stuff, not looking at the rest of the stuff, or at least looking at the rest of the stuff and then saying, okay, what do I want to do about that? Like bringing it back to you, always bringing it back to what you can do, what you can say, what you can think. And that is it.